The maid's daughter proved something the world often forgets. Genius is not owned by titles, money, or big offices. It lives in curiosity, in courage, and in the heart of those who dare to try. That day, she silenced the engineers, stunned the CEO, and inspired everyone watching. At the heart of a bustling city, a large tech company was racing against time to build a groundbreaking invention. It was supposed to be the kind of project that would change the industry, maybe even the world. Yet behind the glass walls of their sleek offices, frustration grew every day. The top engineers, armed with degrees, experience, and resources, had been struggling for months to perfect the design. Every attempt seemed to fail, leaving the CEO restless and the team drained. Among the many workers who kept the company running, there was a maid. She wasn't noticed much, moving quietly from room to room, cleaning up after long meetings and late nights. Sometimes when she couldn't find anyone to look after her daughter, she brought the young girl along after school. The child would sit in the corner with her notebooks, quietly observing the world around her. To most people, she was invisible, just a maid's kid. But soon she would do something no one in that building could ever forget. For months, the company's brightest engineers worked day and night on the invention. On paper, the design looked flawless. In presentations, it promised to change everything. But when it came to building the real machine, nothing worked the way it should. The gears misaligned, the circuits overheated, and the software kept crashing. Every test run ended the same way. Failure. The engineers pored over blueprints and data, filling whiteboards with numbers and sketches. They ran simulations, changed parts, and rewrote codes again and again. Yet no matter how hard they tried, the results stayed the same. Meetings became endless cycles of finger-pointing, suggestions, and half-fixes that led nowhere. The mood in the office shifted from hopeful to heavy. What once felt like an exciting challenge was turning into a nightmare. The CEO grew more impatient with each passing day. Millions of dollars had already been invested, but there was nothing to show investors or the board. Deadlines kept slipping further away, and pressure mounted from every direction. He demanded updates, but the updates were always the same. "We're still working on it." Inside the engineering department, frustration turned into doubt. Some began questioning the design itself. Others quietly wondered if the entire project was even possible. But no one dared to admit defeat. They were, after all, the best in their fields, hired for their brilliance, praised for their experience. How could they confess that they had no answer? Tension thickened in every meeting room. Charts and diagrams filled the walls, but they felt meaningless. Engineers spoke in circles, trying to sound confident, but deep down, most of them were lost. The project that was supposed to make the company famous was instead threatening to ruin its reputation. As weeks turned into months, the CEO's patience wore thin. Investors began to whisper. Employees worried about layoffs. And still, the machine refused to work. The team of experts, the people who were supposed to have all the answers, had run out of ideas. They were trapped in a loop, unable to move forward, unable to go back. No one knew it yet, but the solution wasn't hidden in another late-night meeting or buried in another pile of research papers. The breakthrough would come from the most unexpected place of all, a quiet little girl who sat in the corner, sketching in her notebook while waiting for her mother to finish work. While the engineers argued and the CEO grew more restless, the maid's daughter sat quietly in the corner of the room. She was used to being invisible in this place. Most people barely noticed her when her mother brought her along after school. She would sit with her small backpack, a notebook, and a pencil, quietly doodling while her mother worked. To everyone else, she was just the maid's kid. But what no one realized was that she was listening. Every meeting, every frustrated sigh, every technical explanation that echoed through the office reached her curious ears. She didn't understand every detail, but she understood enough. Her young mind was sharp, and unlike the engineers, she wasn't trapped by years of rigid thinking. To her, the problem didn't seem impossible. It looked like a puzzle waiting to be solved. One afternoon, during yet another heated meeting, the girl looked up from her notebook. She had been sketching quietly while the engineers debated. They were stuck on the same issue again, repeating the same arguments they had for weeks. Her small voice suddenly broke the heavy silence. "Why don't you just..." Do it this way, she asked innocently. The room froze. Heads turned. A few of the engineers exchanged annoyed glances. Who was this child to interrupt their serious discussion? Some chuckled under their breath, thinking it was just childish curiosity. One of them even muttered, "Cute, but this is real work." But the CEO, tired of excuses, raised an eyebrow. He gestured for her to continue. "What do you mean?" he asked. The girl hesitated for a moment, clutching her pencil. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room. But then, with quiet confidence, she walked toward the whiteboard. Standing on tiptoe, she began to sketch her idea. It was simple, drawn in rough lines, but clear. Instead of overcomplicating the design with endless adjustments, she showed a different approach, one that was obvious once you saw it, but had been overlooked by the experts. She pointed to a part of the machine that everyone assumed had to work a certain way. "Why not change this piece?" she said. "It doesn't have to be like that." At first there was silence. A few engineers smirked, but then one of them leaned forward. His expression changed as he looked closer at her drawing. He compared it with the blueprint on the table. Slowly, realization spread across his face. "That could actually work," he whispered. The smirks faded. Engineers gathered around the board, studying the girl's sketch. They asked her to explain, and in her own simple words, she did. She wasn't using big technical terms, but the logic was undeniable. She saw the problem differently, like a child who didn't know the rules. And that was exactly why she found the answer. The room that had been filled with arguments and frustration was suddenly alive with excitement. Engineers began discussing her idea seriously. They started testing it on paper, checking calculations, and running quick models on their laptops. To their shock, the numbers lined up. The CEO watched the scene unfold in silence. His eyes stayed on the little girl, who had just done what his highly paid experts had failed to do for months. She had cut through all the noise with a simple question and a bold sketch. The maid, who had been standing quietly near the door, looked on in disbelief. She had always known her daughter was clever, but she never imagined this. Her heart pounded, with both fear and pride, as she watched her little girl take command of a room full of adults. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. The girl wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was the one with the answer, and for the first time, the engineers weren't laughing. They were listening. The engineers hesitated at first. They weren't used to taking instructions from a child, especially one who wasn't even supposed to be in the room. But the sketch on the board spoke louder than her age. The logic was clear. The simplicity was disarming. It wasn't just a random guess. It was a real solution. One of the senior engineers decided to test it. He grabbed a marker and began running quick calculations next to the girl's drawing. His hand slowed as the numbers started making sense. Another engineer leaned over his shoulder, double-checking the work. Soon, two more joined in. The room, that had been filled with arguments for months, was now silent, except for the sound of pens scratching furiously against the whiteboard. "Wait," one of them finally said, his voice shaky. This actually works." They turned to the CEO, who stood with his arms crossed, watching closely. He nodded once. "Test it." Within minutes, they set up a small prototype, making the adjustment the girl had suggested. The entire room leaned forward, holding their breath as the machine powered on. At first, there was the usual noise, the whirring and buzzing they had heard so many times before. But then, something different happened. The error that had haunted them for months didn't appear. The system held steady. The process ran smoothly. It worked. The engineers stared in disbelief. Some of them even laughed nervously, shaking their heads as if they couldn't accept it. Others clapped their hands together, unable to contain their excitement. They tested it again, and each time the result was the same. Her idea, so simple and overlooked, had solved the problem instantly. The maid, standing near the door, covered her mouth with her hand. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched her daughter beam with quiet pride. The little girl hadn't just interrupted a meeting. She had done what the most brilliant minds in the company couldn't. She had succeeded where the experts had failed. One engineer turned toward her and said softly, almost in awe, "Do you realize what you've just done? The girl shrugged in her shy, childlike way. I just thought it could be easier. That single sentence cut deep, because in truth, the engineers had been trapped by their own experience. They were overthinking, complicating, and second-guessing themselves. They had forgotten to look at the problem with fresh eyes. But this child, untrained and unburdened, had seen what they couldn't. The CEO finally spoke, breaking the stunned silence. You all spent months and millions of dollars chasing answers, and yet the solution was right here, from the one person none of us even thought to ask. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of admiration in his tone. The engineers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked embarrassed, others humbled. But all of them knew one thing. The maid's daughter had just changed the course of their project, and possibly the future of their company. Word spread quickly. People in the office whispered about it in hallways and cafeterias. How a little girl had solved the puzzle that had defeated the brightest minds. Some dismissed it as luck. Others admitted it was pure genius. But no one could deny the truth. Her idea worked. And so, in that crowded meeting room, history was made. The maid's daughter, who had been invisible to everyone just hours before, had become the center of attention. She had silenced the doubts, stunned the CEO, and forced an entire team of experts to rethink what genius really looks like. For a long moment, the room was frozen in silence. The only sound was the steady hum of the machine that had finally worked as it was supposed to. The engineers stood there in disbelief, some with their arms crossed tightly, others with their mouths half open, still trying to process what had just happened. And in the middle of it all stood the maid's daughter, clutching her notebook, her cheeks flushed from both fear and pride. All eyes turned to the CEO. He had been watching quietly, his sharp gaze never leaving the girl from the moment she spoke. Up. He was a man known for being demanding, even ruthless. He rarely smiled, yet now his expression had softened. He walked slowly toward the whiteboard, studying the child's rough sketch one more time. Then he turned to her and asked, "What's your name?" The girl looked up nervously, her small voice barely above a whisper as she answered. The CEO repeated her name, nodding as if committing it to memory. Then, in front of the entire room, he said words no one expected. "You're the smartest person in this room today." Gasps filled the air. The engineers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked embarrassed, others quietly nodded, because deep down, they knew it was true. The CEO continued, his tone firm but filled with admiration. "Talent like this cannot be ignored. You saw what no one else could. You thought differently, and that is the true mark of genius." The girl blinked, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to praise from powerful men in suits. She wasn't used to being seen at all. Behind her, her mother, the maid, stood frozen in shock. Her eyes glistened with tears as she clutched a rag in her hand, torn between pride and disbelief. Then came the moment that stunned everyone. The CEO straightened his tie and looked directly at the maid. "Your daughter has a gift," he said, "and I want to make sure the world sees it." He turned back to the girl. "From today, I'm offering you a scholarship, full support. The best schools, the best mentors, whatever you need to grow this talent of yours. One day, if you choose, you'll work with real engineers, or maybe lead them yourself." The room went silent again, but this time it was a silence filled with awe. No one could believe what they had just heard. The CEO of one of the biggest companies in the city was offering a maid's daughter a future most people only dream about. The little girl's eyes widened. She looked at her mother, unsure if this was real. The maid's knees felt weak. For years she had cleaned rooms like this, invisible to the people inside, and now because of her daughter, the CEO himself was promising a life-changing opportunity. "Sir, I don't know what to say," the maid stammered, her voice trembling. The CEO gave a rare smile. "Say yes, because talent like hers should never be wasted." Applause broke out across the room, hesitant at first but then louder. Even the engineers, humbled by the turn of events, joined in. Some approached the girl, shaking her small hand and congratulating her. For once she wasn't just the maid's kid. She was the center of respect and admiration. The CEO ended the meeting with one final sentence that would echo in everyone's mind long after that day. Remember this. Brilliance doesn't always come with titles or fancy suits or years of experience. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sits in the corner, and waits for someone to listen. The maid stood frozen, her hands trembling as she held onto her cleaning rag. For years, she had worked in silence, moving through hallways and boardrooms unnoticed. She was the woman people passed by without a second thought, the one who cleaned up after late meetings, who emptied trash bins, who knew her place in the shadows. And now, in that very same room where she had always been invisible, her daughter was being celebrated. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the little girl who had just changed everything. This was the same child she had raised in a small apartment, the same child she had helped with homework late at night, the same child who loved to ask endless questions about how the world worked. People had often dismissed her curiosity, calling her too talkative or too nosy. But here, in front of the company's brightest minds, that curiosity had turned into brilliance. The maid could hardly believe what she was hearing. The CEO's words echoed in her ears. Your daughter has a gift. Never in her life had she imagined that someone so powerful, so untouchable, would speak about her daughter with such respect. She pressed her hands together tightly, trying to hold back sobs of pride. Meanwhile, the girl stood at the center of it all, still a little shy, still clutching her notebook, but no longer invisible. A few hours ago, she had been just another child waiting for her mother to finish work. Now she was the girl who had solved the problem the engineers couldn't. She was the girl the CEO himself praised. For the engineers, the moment was humbling. They had spent months drowning in formulas, equations, and theories. They had relied on experience and knowledge, but that same experience had blinded them to the simple solution. Watching the maid's daughter succeed reminded them of something they had long forgotten. True innovation comes from fresh eyes, from daring to question what others accept as unchangeable. And for the CEO, the moment was transformative. He had built his career on trusting experts, on surrounding himself with the best talent money could buy. Yet in one afternoon, a child had shown him that genius can come from the most unexpected places. It wasn't about the degrees, or the suits, or the years of experience. It was about imagination and courage, qualities that cannot be bought, only nurtured. This turning point wasn't just about a machine finally working. It was about people's perceptions being shattered. The maid, who had been invisible for so long, now stood tall with pride. Her daughter, once overlooked, now shined brighter than anyone else in the room. And the CEO, once impatient and doubtful, had rediscovered a powerful truth. Talent has no boundaries. The story spread quickly beyond the boardroom. Employees whispered about it in hallways, telling and retelling the moment when the maid's daughter outsmarted the engineers. Some called it unbelievable, others called it inspiring. But everyone agreed on one thing. They had witnessed something extraordinary. That day marked the turning point not only for the maid's daughter, but for the entire company. From then on, they would never look at talent the same way. They would remember that brilliance could appear in unexpected forms, in unexpected people, at unexpected times. And for the maid herself, the moment was deeply personal. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel small. She felt like the proud mother of a girl whose light could not be ignored. And that pride was worth more than any paycheck she had ever earned. The story did not stay inside the boardroom for long. It spread across the company like wildfire. From the engineers' floor to the break rooms, from assistants to executives, everyone was talking about the maid's daughter, the girl who had walked in quietly, spoken a few simple words, and solved the problem no one else could. For weeks, people repeated the moment as if it were legend. Did you hear what happened in the CEO's meeting? One employee would whisper. A child fixed what the engineers couldn't. Another would reply. Soon the story reached every corner of the company, becoming more than just office gossip. It became a symbol of what was possible when fresh thinking was allowed to shine. The girl's name was remembered, not as the maid's daughter, but as the child who saw what others overlooked. She became a quiet hero inside the company. Some engineers, once skeptical, even admitted she had reminded them of why they became innovators in the first place, to see the world differently, to solve problems others couldn't. Her courage reignited their own curiosity. For the CEO, the moment became a defining lesson. He shared the story with partners, investors, and even at leadership meetings. He used it as an example to remind his team that true creativity does not care about titles, paychecks, or resumes. It comes from curiosity. It comes from daring to ask, what if? It comes from anyone, anywhere, even a maid's child with a notebook. The maid herself walked through the halls differently after that day. She was no longer invisible. People smiled at her, spoke to her with respect, even congratulated her. But what mattered most to her was not the attention. It was the knowledge that her daughter's future was now brighter than she had ever dreamed. The girl, still young, returned to her simple life of school and play. But she carried with her a new sense of confidence. She now knew her voice had power. She now knew that her ideas mattered, and she knew that no matter how small others might see her, she could still change big things. In the months and years that followed, the story of the maid's daughter became company culture. Posters went up on office walls with the words, "Genius can come from anywhere." New employees were told the story during training, and every time the company faced a difficult challenge, someone would whisper, "Remember the maid's daughter. Think differently." The moral was clear, and it touched everyone who heard it. Never underestimate where brilliance can come from. Genius is not trapped in degrees or titles. It does not wear fancy suits or sit in corner offices. It can appear in the most unexpected places, even in the hands of a child, even in the daughter of a maid. And so, her story became bigger than a machine, bigger than a company. It became a reminder for the world that the future is often shaped by those no one is watching. That sometimes the people overlooked, the ones dismissed, the ones seen as small, are the ones who hold the answers. The girl had proven it once, in a quiet boardroom, with nothing but a notebook and courage. And that proof would inspire countless others to look at problems with fresh eyes, to believe in their own voices, and to remember that change can come from anyone, anywhere, even a child, even the maid's kid.